The witch wound is a feminine wound where there is a fear to be powerful. There is a fear to be inconvenient. There is a fear to trust your spiritual gifts. There is a fear of connection because of millennia of being told it's not safe, you'll be persecuted. It's the burning times, which we know they targeted older women. They targeted midwives and healers because women weren't allowed to go to med school and they wanted the men to take over that. They targeted people on pieces of land that the government coveted. And I think the pendulum is shifting back to the divine feminine. I think podcasts like this are a big part of it. And I think these conversations, I mean, I always say if you wouldn't have been burned by the church 500 years ago, are you even living? So this conversation would qualify.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Ask Julie Ryan Show. It's where we blend spirituality and practicality to help you live a life of purpose and joy. We have Taylor Paige with us on the show today. Taylor's an angelic intuitive, evidential medium, and an astrologer who helps people better their lives by communicating with angels, channeling their birth chart, and healing their witch wound. Among the many questions I have for Taylor, since I've never heard of a witch wound, you know I'm going to be asking about that too. Please remember to subscribe, leave a comment, and share this episode with your family and friends. Now let's go chat with Taylor. Taylor, welcome to the show. I'm so delighted to have you with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be here.
We were talking before we started recording, and where she lives now in the Los Angeles area, I used to live in the same town. So we were just kind of sharing, how it's grown up and all of that. So you never know how you're going to be connected.
Exactly. That's what I was just thinking. There's something called the red string theory where people have these soul connections at some point will intersect. And so we must be connected in some way.
I guess. Absolutely. You communicate with angelic guides. Do they deliver different types of messages from other guides, like the Akashic guides, the regular spirit guides, God himself, source himself? Tell us about that. How does it differ?
Yes. So I am also a evidential medium. So I speak with people's past loved ones and I speak with angels and angelic guides.
Please explain what an evidential medium is to people who don't know.
Absolutely. So an evidential medium is somebody who connects with your past loved ones on the other side. And if you ever study with the spiritualists, they are very adamant on the evidential part, where to show you without a shadow of a doubt that you are speaking with your person, that there has to be at least, they teach 3 to 5 at the very minimum pieces of solid evidence that we could not have known about your person, whether that's how the relationship to you, how they passed, their personality, how what they did for work while they were here, et cetera, et cetera. And only when you've built out this picture of who this person is without a shadow of a doubt, then you're allowed to say they miss you, they love you, they're proud of you. You can give the messages from them. But until you have that evidential part, it's really the ethics of making sure that people know that when they're in their most vulnerable state, that they can trust the medium. So I'm very proud to be an evidential medium, and it's very rewarding work. And so it was really when I started connecting with past loved ones that I noticed how different they were to angels. So I connect to past loved ones in my heart chakra. I kind of move out my awareness from my heart, and I can I'm extremely clairsentient, and I can start to feel who's around, and from that start to connect with them and work with them. Whereas angels, I connect with them at the very tippy top of my crown chakra. So instead of directing my awareness out, I direct it up. And where past loved ones speak very literally. Like if I see a basketball, I'm not going to take that as a symbol for athleticism. I'm going to say they played basketball because that's how they speak. Whereas angels, in my experience, speak very symbolically. And they like to give these sort of beautiful images that I almost see the symbols and the images as invitations for connection that continue. They're like a gift that keeps on giving. And as you grow and evolve, you'll relate to that symbol in a different way. Like this one reading, this girl, her angels right away was showing me this snow globe where everything she wanted was like inside of this snow globe, and she was looking on the peripheral of the snow globe. That's not how past loved ones would speak, but the angels were using that image as a way of giving a lot of different messages about longing and the life she's looking for, but instead realizing that this snow globe, might not be the only area to look in, and there was just so many things to decode there. I also experienced past loved ones coming in as a little bit cooler, like the air around me gets a little cooler when I'm working with past loved ones. And I start sweating when I'm working with angels. But I think that there's also just a level of differentiation in the vessel. So I don't know if this is a definitive fact about angels and past loved ones and the differences, or just my perception as the medium.
Well, it's your perception, and that's just something that you've used as a guide.
Exactly.
To help you know with whom you're conversing.
Exactly.
That's what I get from that. Are there other spirit guides with whom you communicate as well, or is it pretty much just deceased loved ones, spirits, and angels? Or are you talking to other spirit guides?
For me, I work with angels and past loved ones primarily. And then I also consider the planets as spirit guides. And I do work with astrology as well.
Oh, say more about that. Planets are spirit guides.
Yeah, I think that we tend to anthropomorphize the divine and only think of spirit guides in almost these like humanoid forms. But what's come through to me as an intuitive astrologer is that each planet is on a specific frequency to guide humanity, and that they are a form of spirit guide as well.
So anthropomorphic, that's a big vocabulary word. For those of us, including me, that don't know what that means, I can look it up, but give us the cliff notes. What does that mean, number one? And number two, can you give us an example of what a planet's doing to be a guide to somebody?
Absolutely. So anthropomorphize is synonymous with personify. So basically, we project the human image onto what we don't understand, which is the divine. God is this man in the sky that is judgmental. And it's like we couldn't be more human in our perception of the divine. And I find it really funny. And even when we talk about aliens, we're like, well, they have big eyes and they're 2 legs and arms. It's like we just make everything in our image. And I find that really limiting, but also really endearing for humans that we do that. I think it's funny. But yeah, so the planets, when you're born, your birth chart has a configuration of what I call the poem of the soul, which is basically your lessons, what you came here to learn, and it's all a unique frequency that I approach astrology in a very angelic way. I'm very informed by my work with angels, which is not so much about prediction, more about honoring the free will of the individual. So I always say there's nothing more important in your birth chart than who you choose to be in each moment, because I think a lot of fear-based principles can come into astrology. But going back to the planets as spirit guides, they're all awakening a different archetypal consciousness in us. So each planet has a different archetypal consciousness, different lesson, different area of human life that it helps to awaken in us. Like we've been moving through very Plutonian times. Pluto has really taken over as one of the main spirit guides for humanity in this moment. And Pluto is all about death, grief, release, stepping more into your power, transformation from the root level up. And with Pluto in the final degree of Capricorn and the United States going through its Pluto return, we can really feel that it's a very karmic moment of endings, Phoenix energy, death and rebirth. And that's been really felt on a collective level and an individual level. So I think each planet almost vibrates at this frequency that helps us remember the truth of who we are, that teaches, each planet teaches different lessons. And if that's not a spirit guide, I don't know what is.
Do those planetary spirit guides affect everybody in the same way? Or are they like you would have a different influence from the Pluto return than I would? And is that based on our birth chart?
Yes. So there's two sort of simultaneous levels that are happening. So the planets affect everybody on the collective based off of where they are now. And that is that whole, Hermetic principle of correspondence, as above, so below, as within, so without. So because it's affecting us on the macro, we'll feel it on the micro as well. So that's sort of the overarching layer. But then also where our natal Pluto, which by the way, it's 11:11 right now is time of recording. It just turned to 11:12. But where your natal, meaning your birth chart Pluto is, will be interacted with in a different way. And that's what makes it individual to us. And what's interesting about astrology is that even if you have a twin, your birth chart is different. So my dad is a twin. My mom was an astrologer. So I grew up with astrology. It was like a second language to me. And my dad's chart was different than his twin's chart. So it's a very precise science. It's very beautiful. And the more you dive into it, the more you can see that without a doubt, the planets are here to support our awakening and evolution of consciousness, and not just support it, but mirror it back to us.
Okay. What's the significance of 11:11 to you?
So I love angel numbers, as an angelic intuitive. 11:11 to me looks like two doorways mirroring each other. And to me, it's a very much portal number energy where it's sort of like you're ready to walk into what's next. So when people see 11:11 a lot, I find that it's usually through times of change and up level and transformation. I think angel numbers are fun. I think that they show us the magic of the universe. They zap us out of the mundane. They show us that our angels and guides are here. I think one of the top mistakes I see in people's intuitive development journey is projecting the message they want to be true onto the angel numbers and then feeling really disappointed and disconnected when whatever message they're projecting doesn't come true. So I take the numbers more as a sign for connection, an invitation for connection, an invitation to create sacred space more than the message itself.
Which is perfect for our conversation, right? We're creating a sacred space where spirit can help us in this conversation to convey things that are going to be helpful to those that are going to watch this and listen to it. I love that. Very wonderful. Okay, so back to the astrology thing for a minute. Astrology, you said, is a very exact science and has, and I'm going to add, it's been used since the beginning of time. Certainly popes and leaders and kings and presidents and people like that have all used astrology. Some of them have kept it in the closet in recent years because they don't want to be ridiculed because of it. But tell us more about how it's an exact science. How does it really give us the information that can guide us and be helpful to us in our lives?
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point of it being used forever, I think the earliest recorded horoscope was from ancient Babylon around 440 BCE. So there is, think about it, before light pollution, how vivid the stars were for people on Earth. And, I'm outside of LA. I don't see the stars very well, but I went on a little UFO tour in Sedona and the stars were so amazing and so bright and you could just see so much. And just imagine the fixation and just the natural sense of awe and connection to the divine when they were looking at the stars. So the stars and humanity have had an intimate relationship since conception, like you said. And I think that's so powerful and so beautiful. And basically, like any other scientific system, there has been observation throughout millennia and theories and hypotheses on how the planets affect us. And basically, it was a slow process of there were ancient people who every day would be like, the stars are doing this and the prices of fish went up. The stars are doing this and there's a war at our gates. And there were and times of eclipses have always been very dramatic throughout human history. And I think it was King Darius of Persia who fell during an eclipse to Alexander the Great, and that was prophesied hundreds of years before. So there's so much to the history of astrology. It's amazing when you dive into it. And basically, like I said, it's just constant observation throughout millennia. It's really interesting to go backwards and read what medieval astrologers would say Aries was like, or Scorpio was like. It's like these things have been talked about for a really long time. And we've basically integrated the outer planets, which are Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, which the technology for the ancients couldn't see those planets. And when that happens, basically a committee of astrologers discuss the quality of the planet, the energy of the planet, the mythology, and they name the planet and they start to discuss what it means overall. And it's just been this collective upgrade sort of in consciousness. As our technology and ability to perceive the stars advances, so too does our consciousness grow. And it's a beautiful evolution. So to me, with my growing up with my mom as an astrologer, I was like, yeah, my uncle would always bring the birth charts of his dates to my mom, and we would talk about every woman he was dating and her chart. And it was like kind of just a fun thing to do. But about 4 years ago, I started my own birth chart practice with clients. And that's what just really blew me away, because before this, I only practiced on friends and family. But this is complete strangers that I know nothing about. And I can see their parents' divorce. I can see, that they need to be an artist. I can see all of these things in their chart. And that to me is what really, because I'm evidence-based and I'm scientific and I'm not the most airy-fairy person in the spiritual world. And so I just love the precision of astrology. And to me, the proof is in the process and the experience. And there's an astrologer, his name is Colin Bedell, I believe. He's Queer Cosmos on Instagram. And he said something that really resonated with me. He said, I don't believe in astrology. I experience it. And when you are very sensitive, you do experience it, like the full moon, the new moon, these very dramatic things, you experience it. And that's what I feel about the spirit world too. At this point, I don't believe in it. I experience it and I live it.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. And full moons, I'm laughing in my head because whenever there's a full moon, I always howl like a wolf. So my husband's like, oh God, here it comes. Because I'll be, and if I'm away from him someplace, I'm out of town or I'm wherever driving home, and I'll just get him on the phone and I'll start howling and he'll just say, oh my goodness. Or if he's down in our media room and I'll be outside doing something at night and I'll come around and stand outside the window and start howling. He's just like, oh my God, I married a crazy woman.
I love that.
All right. Back to one more question about astrology at this point. I'm not saying I won't bring more up because this conversation may lead us there, but I know there are different forms of astrology, like different Asian forms, ancient Chinese, whatever astrology, and Merlin the Magician astrology with King Arthur, and the more of the European, and then the Middle Eastern philosophies too. Is there much of a difference between those? Have you found? The Vedic, I know Vedic astrology is a thing too.
Definitely. There are some really big differences in all of these forms. When King Alexander the Great conquered Persia and united the East and the West, he created the Great Library of Alexandria. And in that time period, there was a lot of mixing of systems because of that connection of East and West. So there definitely is some overlap. I think it's called syncretism for that time period where the East and the West would collaborate. But these systems are definitely different and they have their own differences. I'm not super familiar with Vedic astrology. I myself am a Western astrologer, which is a mix of Greek, Roman, Babylon. Some are eluding me, but yeah, I'm a Western astrologer myself.
Okay. And do you think that really, regardless of which flavor you're using of astrology, normally you're going to come up with the same kind of stuff. It's just a different way to get there. It's like you can eat Asian food or American food or Greek food. It's all still food. It's just a different flavor of the same food.
I believe spirit is going to get you the message. So I don't hold the reins too tightly. I believe whatever your heart resonates with, it resonates for a reason, and spirit will work through that to get you the message.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, back to the angels. Do you communicate with different types of angels? Have you found that the archangels are going to come in with a message on certain topics, and the guardian angels are going to come in with maybe a different type of topic response. How does that work?
So I usually speak most with our personal angels, and the guardian angels, I think they're synonymous, and that's who I usually speak with. And I always say that somebody's team of angels is the exact frequency of their higher self. So it's like an interesting form of guide that's here to help us remember our higher self and choose our higher self. And I just think it's really, really beautiful. Archangels do come into my sessions once in a while, and I find it's usually for people. So because of the tie to angels, I'm a very safe space for people, like people who grew up with religious trauma, people who aren't sure what to believe. The word angel is such a comforting, unconditionally loving connection point. And so archangels for me usually come in either as a confirmation because someone has been asking them to, or because somebody grew up in a religious household and they don't know what to make of all of this and they feel more comfortable working with archangels. So usually if an archangel steps in, I'm like, for my sessions, I kind of know, okay, there might be some like witch wound here. There might be some fear of connection. And there's, and then also, as you know, all the archangels have sort of different areas that they try to help guide humanity in, sort of like the planets. It's like everything sort of breaks down to this same system, which is just for our understanding because they really are quantum in their nature and not restricted like us. But sometimes they come in because they could use a little something from them based off of what they're navigating in their life.
What's a witch wound?
Oh, Julie. Don't get me started. No, I'm just joking. I could talk about this forever.
No, I'm fascinated. You just kind of threw that in. Well, maybe we're working on their witch wound. I'm like, okay, what's a witch wound?
So a witch wound, and like the word witch, it's like I keep taking on these words and these systems that have so many possible meanings. Like angels, everybody has their own definition for that. Witch, everybody has their own definition for that. So of course, I'm just speaking for my definition, my experience. But for me, the witch wound is a feminine wound. Well, I won't actually gender it. It's a wound in the collective consciousness where there is a fear to be powerful. There is a fear to be inconvenient. There is a fear to trust your spiritual gifts. There is a fear of connection because of millennia of being told it's not safe, you'll be persecuted. Like, it's the burning times, which we know they targeted older women. They targeted midwives and healers because women weren't allowed to go to med school and they wanted the men to take over that. They targeted people on pieces of land that the government coveted. And the archetype of the witch in modern day society of what's been demonized, I call it patriarchal PR because it's very intentional. It's an old hag who's scary and eats children. So let's break that down. The eating children part, would you ever trust a midwife to deliver your baby that eats babies? That's very intentional. The old part, you can no longer birth babies for capitalism and patriarchy, two burgeoning systems that had no place for the witch. Older women back in the day were also morality keepers for the community and were speaking out about these systems and how they abused power and that they couldn't have that. So everything about the archetype and the vision of these old ugly witches is basically through the lens, through the male gaze. It's like not beautiful, not worthwhile, can't have babies. In fact, will eat your babies. And actually, everything about women connection is a part of the witch wound as well. I mean, I can go on and on about this, but even the word gossip used to mean a good female friend. And gossip, women would come together and be like, my husband's treating me this way. My husband's doing this to me. And they would talk to each other. And there was power in them meeting and talking. And then it's like, no, you guys are gossiping. That's evil. That's a sin. That's a sign of not being a good woman. And so the witch wound goes down to our very, very core. The witch is one of the only archetypes that doesn't define herself based on who she is to other people. She's not a wife. She's not a mother. She's not a friend even. She is somebody focused on her own desire and her own magic and her own creation to the divine. And that is everything that has been sanitized out. And our whole world reflects that. And I think the pendulum is shifting back to the divine feminine. I think podcasts like this are a big part of it. And I think these conversations, I mean, I always say, if you wouldn't have been burned by the church 500 years ago, are you even living? So this conversation would qualify.
Well, not just the church. It was the most well-educated men who were doing that in America and in Europe and in Germany in particular, too. A lot of this went on in Germany, from what I understand.
Yes, and I forgetting the name, I want to say it's Henrik Kramer, but I forget, who wrote the Malleus Maleficarum, which is basically the text on hunting witches and identifying witches. And it is very much tied to the church, but so many people in every single culture has their own version of this. So it's not just the church, it's wherever women exist, there's systems to oppress our magic. And so the Malleus Maleficarum was the number 2 bestseller for centuries, right below the Bible. So that would have been read by the judges. That would have been read by the people in power. That would have been read and internalized by everyone. And so I think the witch wound is very tied to epigenetics, which is passed down trauma. And even if us in modern day don't see quote unquote witch trials, an ancestor would have. Somebody would have been told they need to be quiet to be safe. Somebody would have been told it's not safe to connect. And even as a medium today, I just went to this like haunted house experience. It was like this play haunted house thing. And people are so scared of spirit. And there is so much fear of the unknown. And it's so demonized. And there's been such a gaping wound. And we've been so sanitized from the process of death. And it's very sad to me how far we've strayed. But I do think that there's a big wave of consciousness that's remembering and waking up too.
Well, and people are interested in this stuff because I find, and you may as well, that when somebody finds out I'm a medical intuitive and psychic medium, they're kind of like, ugh. And then they'll bring something up and they'll say like, well, you have to prove this to me. And I'll say, well, really, I don't. If you want to talk about it, I'm happy to discuss it with you. But what else do you want to discuss? Do you want to discuss the weather or football or politics, whatever? I'm happy to discuss whatever. And I find that when I take it away from them, because I don't care and I don't need to convince anybody of anything. When I take it away, they go, oh, no, I'm interested. Everybody's interested. They're just afraid of it, to your point, because it's been so indoctrinated into our zeitgeist. And I agree that more and more people are getting interested and being led to the spirituality part way more so than religions. Religions are finding a huge drop-off in their attendance at their services and donations and things like that. Have you found the same?
Absolutely. And even on my own personal journey, I was raised Jewish, and I think that it's a beautiful religion. I was raised very Reform, and we had a female rabbi, so that was awesome. But even from a young age, I was like, don't put words in my mouth. I can speak to God directly. And it just didn't resonate with me. I think group worship is beautiful and serves a purpose, but I think more and more people are finding their individual connection with a higher power.
I agree. Absolutely. Okay. So how does the information come to you? You had mentioned that you feel things. Do you just give us just kind of an example of you're working with a client and do they come to you and say, hey, I want to talk to my angels and my deceased loved ones, and then you just are off to the races and you just see what comes in? What's your procedure?
So I'm sure you know that we can plan and they laugh on the other side. So I have different types of sessions that people can book. They can book an angel reading. They can book an angel reading with mediumship. They can do just mediumship, but I always say spirit knows best. So I kind of like to just be the vessel to open up for what the client needs, because sometimes they need something that they don't even know consciously that they should ask about. So that being said, my two first clairs that came online were feeling and knowing. And those to this day are my bread and butter. And knowing is such an intense clair to be one of your first, because you have to learn to trust yourself so deeply. So seeing came on next. And I'd say hearing is like sort of my weakest clair. I always joke, I'm like, I don't know if I'm a bad listener or what, but hearing just doesn't come online as strongly for me. Sometimes it does, but like if a spirit person is telling me their name, I more know their name than actually hear it. So I basically, in my sessions, I don't like to work predictively. I don't think that is really in alignment with my beliefs or what services the client for the highest good. What I personally like to focus on is how to connect you here and now on your highest path, how to give you the clarity, the confidence, the healing, the wisdom, the truth that you most need right now, so that everything else can connect with your highest timeline. Because I know personally when people have given me predictive messages, it gets me in my head, or it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, or it's just not my way that I like to work. And I feel angels are a very gentle form of guidance. Like they're all about asking answering the question that you ask, and they're very much about free will and empowerment. So I really enjoy working with them. And so I first have you do a little visualization with me. I have you repeat out loud a prayer to call your angels in and invite them in. And then from there, I just open my awareness to whatever comes through. And at this point, all my clairs just work together in harmony. And usually even before the session, I'm not like meditating for 30 minutes before every session, but for a couple minutes, I'll start to just get into the space before the client even joins me on the call. And usually I'm already kind of picking up on what they want to talk about. And then after the prayer, I just open up to your energy and I just say whatever I'm getting before you have a chance to tell me what's going on. And then that's usually synchronistic with what they wanted to talk about anyway. And then we dive in. And then from there, if any past loved ones want to chime in, they're welcome to. And it's beautiful how angels and past loved ones work together. Like, since I have almost a psychological approach as this sort of grounded science-based thing, I talk about the inner child a lot. I think the inner child is a form of spirit guide. And I like to fuse what their angels are talking about, and then usually an ancestor on the other side who had a similar experience or a similar lesson or a similar dynamic or relationship of what we're speaking about in the angel portion comes up to support it and talk about where the cycle began or things like that. So it's really cool how angels and loved ones in spirit work together for a more holistic reading.
Does everybody have a guardian angel and extra angels? Does the guardian angels stay with us throughout all of our lifetimes? How does all that work?
Yes, I love this question. So this kind of goes back to that idea of anthropomorphizing the divine. And so it's very common for us to think of our angels in physical bodies because we're in a physical body, which would make sense that we would say, do we have one? Do we have two? Do we have three? But in reality, our angels are a frequency of energy that are not restricted by time, space, form. Even the word angel is slightly limiting to them. It's just the closest match in English to what they are. And so it's not like you have three angels and their names are Tim, Peter, and Paul, and they watch over you. They will take shapes and names and colors like the archangels have for us to better understand them. But their nature is quantum, which going into this, I believe all of our lifetimes are happening at once. And how it's been explained to me is that our physical bodies are bookmarks for consciousness. So basically, this is such a big topic to describe, but I'll do my best, where basically that's where some deja vu comes from. And so, yes, our angels and guides are with us literally on all timelines and dimensions at once. But that when we're in a physical body, it helps us to distill our perception of time into linear thinking. And like when our consciousness, like when they sort of jump from timeline to timeline, our bodies are bookmarks in those consciousness.
Yeah, great example. I had early on when I started doing this work, people would say, well, what's my guardian angel's name? And I'd get some name that was 15 letters and they were all consonants and no vowels. And I'd think, is that from a dead language? Is it from a language from another planet in a different galaxy? Or what's the deal? So I started asking them, just give me a name, make it understandable English that's easy to pronounce, easy to spell, something we can give them.
Yeah.
So they've come in with less complex names when I ask that. And I always use the caveat of, that doesn't mean that's this angel's real name. They're giving us a name so we can have a frame of reference when you're thinking of it, but it's just energy. To piggyback on what you said. And I was in Ireland a couple of months ago, Taylor, and this sweet little girl named Willow, my girlfriend's granddaughter, who's 5, wanted to know her guardian angel's name. So I got it for her. And then she said, does my angel have a middle name? Which was so cute. I never had anybody ask that before. And so we got a name for her middle name. And so my girlfriend said, well, do all guardian angels have middle names? And I heard, if you want them to.
Exactly.
So it goes back to the, we're going to give you a frame of reference here that you'll understand from your human perspective in order to connect with the frequency of the angel.
Exactly. And one time early on in my development, I was walking by these honeysuckle bushes and I was speaking to my angels. And I was like, angels, how many of you are there around me? And they said more than the honeysuckles on this bush, which were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. And so I think it's really beautiful to think of it as just hundreds of angels around us, like as this energy form helping us. And I find that so beautiful.
I agree. Well, back to your family, you said your mom was an astrologist. Did she do that for her living or did she do it just for fun?
She did it just for fun. Going back to the witch wound, I don't think it was even in her consciousness to go public with it. I think it was a very hush-hush thing. And so it's really beautiful how these arts are having a resurgence these days. She just did it for friends and family. And I was always rapt. Like, I was so excited. And so we would do something called tea and birth charts, which in retrospect is so witchy. And my mom would brew a big pot of tea and we'd sit around the kitchen with whoever wanted their chart read. And I would be like a little shadow over her shoulder, taking everything in. And it was awesome.
Well, reading the tea leaves, that's ancient in a lot of cultures. And the coffee grounds too, same thing. And the pendulums, using the pendulums, that stuff's all ancient as well. So would you say you come from a spiritual family? I know you said you were raised Jewish. Certainly there's lots of angels and, signs in the Bible and in the Torah and all of that. But would you say that it's a spiritual background? And how did you get from watching your mom do astrology birth charts into doing what you're doing now, including the evidential medium role that you're playing? Give us kind of a synopsis of where you went from being a little girl in the kitchen with the pot of tea to where you are now.
Yeah, this was a long and complicated journey. I definitely grew up very spiritual. My mom's side of the family from Yugoslavia, now Serbia, had a history of speaking with spirits there. But my upbringing was interesting because my mom was a Pisces sun and moon in the 12th house. So she was very much spiritual. She passed in 2021. So she's no longer here, but she's definitely a guide for me on the other side and a big reason why I went into mediumship. 6 months before she passed unexpectedly, my guides told me it was time to learn mediumship, which was very interesting. But yeah, so I was very afraid, like most kids are, because even though I was raised spiritual, I didn't have the language to describe my experience. And like I said, my two main clairs were feeling and knowing. So I could feel people around me as I was trying to sleep. I knew there was a man in the corner of the room watching me, but I couldn't articulate or understand or express.
How old were you when you were sensing the man's spirit in your room?
I mean, since conscious awareness, I would not be able to sleep with the lights off. I would like
So
blast a little kid, and through my entire life until I opened up to angels, which is why I started with angels, because it's all love and I felt very safe to do that. And so that's why I think I'm the right person in this space to help people who are also afraid, because now I understand so deeply. And I think a lot of people with these gifts, which every single person has the ability to tap in, but some people it's just more on the surface. And for me, it's just been so on the surface and I didn't understand it. And I think there's almost a prerequisite of feeling the fear and doing it anyway as a part of walking this path. So I think fear, whether it's fear of your gifts, whether it's fear of judgment, whether it's fear of how society will see you, there's always an element of facing the fear and moving forward anyway on this path that I think is powerful.
I agree, 100%.
Yeah. And so I hit a rock bottom moment in my life because I didn't want to tune in. If it wasn't right in front of me with my 5 physical senses, I didn't want to be aware of it. And that led me to a path where I basically tied a blindfold around my third eye. And I was in an abusive relationship. I was physically sick. I was in the wrong career path. Like I just hit such a low moment. And there was a time where I literally had to leave my house at 3 a.m. because my ex-boyfriend at the time came home drunk and I was scared. It was on Halloween. And I was crying and I got to a hotel and I looked at myself in the mirror and I did not recognize myself anymore. I had gotten so low and so dim. And I looked in the mirror and in that moment I said, never again. And I made myself a promise, never again will I let myself be treated this way. And from there, everything changed. And I put a psychic call out to the universe. I was like, I need help. I don't understand what I'm seeing or feeling or hearing or whatever, but I'm petrified of it. Like, please send me guidance. And within the week, and by the way, my mom, even though she was an astrologer, the spirit stuff, the psychic stuff, she would have knowings and things like that, but she also was not like developed in this way at all. It was like something generations back. And so within the week, 2 different psychics found me actually. And one of them communicated to a family friend and said, hey, you have a girl in LA who needs me. And she connected me with her. And it was that person. I thought she was going to come to my house and clear the energy, but instead she led me through this guided meditation. And part of it was inviting my angels in. And at that time, I invited them in and I just started sobbing, like the warmest tears. And it was almost like I was feeling their joy through my tears, because in blocking out all of the stuff that scared me, I was also blocking out my angels. And I also saw my grandfather in spirit come through when she was leading me through. And it was a really interesting experience because I grew up with only black and white photos of him. And I thought he had brown hair, but he actually had black. And when I saw him, he had black hair. And I asked my mom later, I was like, did Grandpa have black hair? And she's like, yeah. I was like, oh, that's so weird. I thought he had brown because it was only black and white photos. So that was like an interesting piece of evidence for me even early on. And from there, I just got this message. And it was like, I was living in a small studio in Studio City. I was a waitress. I wanted to be a comedy writer. And I was just completely like burnt out and hitting wall after wall. And I of course, broke up with that ex. And it was like this new chapter. And I just got this message: sell your couch, sell your furniture, turn your little studio into a reading room, and put on Facebook that for a year you're doing free angel readings. And at this time, this was in 2016, 2017. It wasn't as popular as it is now. Like nobody really knew what I was talking about. But the restaurant that I was working in was full of spiritual people. So on my 30-minute breaks, I'd be doing their birth charts. After work, they'd come to get a free reading from me. And so I always call this my internship year. And I was completely self-taught or taught by our angels and the spirit world. And I just leaned in and I trusted. And I was waitressing to support myself and doing angel readings on the side. And I was always busy, always doing something, but I was so lit up by the work that it didn't feel that way. And then I remember in 2017 was like my first professional reading. I charged $30 for it. And I remember I took myself out for dinner on that $30 after, and it was like the most celebratory experience of my life. I was like, I can't believe I just made money doing this. This is so cool. And so, yeah, it was an amazing process. And honestly, I never thought this was going to be my path. But then friends told friends, who told friends of friends, who told friends to friends. And it just has spiraled into such a amazing, supported journey.
So the angels were your marketing team, obviously.
Exactly.
Yeah. Wow. What a story. And what did your family think when you decided to do this full time? Were they supportive? Were they surprised?
Yeah, my mom was always my biggest fan. She was my best friend, and she got me into a shop in Ojai. And I remember I had to read for the owner, then I had to read for her daughter, and then I had to read for her again. And then finally I got in, and then I was doing so many readings. And that was like a boot camp on a whole nother level, because before that I was reading for friends and family who were kind and knew me and I knew them, but you never know who is going to walk into a shop and what their background is and what their beliefs are. And it was totally an amazing boot camp for me as a reader to have that experience. My dad, he was like, okay, first she wanted to be an actress and then a comedy writer. And now this is just another one of her phases. And he didn't really take it seriously in the beginning. He had already been married to my mom for like 25 years by this point. So he knew when Mercury was in retrograde, and he knew like certain things just in the spiritual world from her. But what really changed my dad is that some of his employees started to come to the shop in Ojai where I was working. And there was one in particular who came to visit me. And this is so funny, but her past turtle came through. I was like, this is so interesting, but did you have a pet turtle on the other side? And she was like, what the hell? And yeah, I did. And I was like, and he was with you in college and he helped you get through this and that. And he wants to say hi. And she was like, what the heck? And then she asked about these 3 men she was like seeing. And I was like, this one's married. This one isn't ready. This one's never going to call you again. And it all happened that way. And so the next Monday, she went into my dad's office and was like, your daughter told me this, 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 and this. And that started to get his attention. And then the more I sort of got, professional success or notoriety, and the more my wait list grew, now he's like the most proud of me. He tells everybody about it. It's really cute.
Yeah. Well, and that's a big deal because a lot of family members just are kind of like, yeah, she does some kind of counseling thing, and they won't go out there. My older brother, for years and years and years, just didn't buy any of this, which I don't care. That's fine, whatever he wants. And then one of his friends was having a medical situation, and he called me and he said, okay, do your thing. And I nailed what was going on when I was doing my thing. And ever since then, I'm one of the first ones that he calls when something's up along those lines. Speaking of the turtle, it reminds me of a client who same thing, this tortoise came through, a turtle. When we were talking with I think it was their father and husband. It was a mother and son who were my clients on the phone. And I said, okay, I'm seeing this big turtle. And they both started laughing. And I said, what's up with the turtle? They said, yeah, we had a tortoise that showed up in our yard and was our pet for 15 or 20 years. And we called it Toby, and Toby was just great. And then when Toby laid eggs one day, we decided we needed to change his name to Tobitha. And so that's what they did. But you're the only other person I've ever heard that's seen a turtle that showed up, in a reading. And it's so funny. And I always say, and I think to myself, you just can't make this stuff up. It's too out there and random. And I think part of the skill set that you and I have too is learning to trust what we get, even when it doesn't make sense to us.
Yes.
It inevitably is going to make sense to the person with whom we're working, either at that moment, at a later time when they're thinking about it, or it could pertain to something that hasn't transpired yet. Have you found the same thing?
Absolutely. And I think that is the lifelong constant journey of the medium, is just trusting what we get. And the more we can do that, I think the more in service to the spirit world and the client we are. And sometimes you have to be strong because, people will be like, no, that's not right. That's not right. And you're like, I know what I'm getting and I'm standing firm in this. Like even something so small as this woman's dad came through and he was showing me he was deaf in his left ear. And she's like, no, it was the right. And I was like, I know you're saying that, but he is like adamant that it's the left. And the next day she called me and she's like, it was the left. We would whisper in his right. And I just thought it was the right, but we would whisper in his right so he could hear us because it was the left they couldn't hear. I was like, exactly. And then she could know without a shadow of a doubt that was really her dad because of that. And so we have to trust ourselves so much that even if the sitter is saying no, we're like, okay, either take this with you and it will make more sense later, or just I have to stick with what I'm getting.
Well, yeah. And it's just like, okay, that's what I'm getting. I had a gal call into my live one time. It's triggering this memory. And we were talking with her great aunt who'd passed quite a while ago, but she was really close to the great aunt. And so the aunt was talking about the pet monkey, the pet spider monkey. And the gal that was on my live said, I never heard anything about a spider monkey. So anyway, she called her grandmother during the break and she came back on and she said, yeah, apparently there was a neighbor of theirs when they were growing up that had a spider monkey as a pet, and all the kids in the neighborhood used to go over and play with it. And it was the highlight of their block was this spider monkey. So yeah. And I think it's really important for us not to get into a wills contest. It's just, okay, that's what I'm getting. It may make sense to you later. You may want to check it out if you're led. If you're not, that's fine too. All I can do is report on what I'm getting.
Absolutely. And it's really funny that you brought up the spider monkey because my mom had a pet spider monkey growing up. So that's a funny synchronicity.
Yeah. No coincidences in life. I want to go into the birth chart for a minute because there's so many differing opinions about birth charts. We had somebody on recently who said that our birth charts are figured out eons before we're incarnated, because you think about our great, triple great, double great, whatever our grandparents had to meet, and then all these other people down the line, and that our birth chart is really designed and conceived way before we incarnate. And then there are people that say, no, we in between lives, we come up with what our plan is, and then it's set in stone. And all these different entities in spirit, the guides, the angels, all of them have to put these things in motion so that all of the variables need to come together so we can experience and explore what it is we want to. I'm eager to hear what your concept is of the birth chart, and also what kind of information do you get and how does it help the client?
Yeah. So sometimes with these big picture questions, I can't pretend to know the answer. It's like, I think there are some things that in this form we can't fully understand. And I think we can take educated guesses while we're here. And I can see the merit of both of those theories. And honestly, the truth is it's probably a mix of both. So I think with these big picture questions, even though I do this work, I'm the first one to say I don't have all the answers and I wish that I could, but I'm a little wary of people who claim to have all of the answers as well. So I like to take educated guesses and I like to talk about it. I mean, when you were saying that our birth chart was planned out eons and eons ago, something in that felt right. But at the same time, the idea of us picking our journey and things like that, and integrating what the soul might have learned in a previous lifetime, and then picking another thing, and then based off of, because I really do believe in free will. So I think I had on my own podcast this guest come on and she said karma is repaid in love. So say, for example, in one lifetime you murder someone, maybe in the next lifetime that would be your special needs children that you take care of for the rest of your life. So I think that would affect the birth chart, because it's like the free will choices that you made in one life would probably directly affect who you came in to be and what you came in to experience in the next life. So I think that's just such an interesting topic. And, I don't, I always say I should be more curious than I am, because sometimes I get these like knowings about things, but I'm so focused on helping my individual clients and less on the big picture of like, what does this all mean? What is the answer to this? What are these bigger systems? And so I think as I grow in my development, maybe I'll get to that and answer that more, where it's more from spirit and less my imagination. But where I am right now in my development, I'm just really happy to keep going with what I'm getting.
Yeah. So when you work with somebody's birth chart, what kind of information comes into you? And how does the client find that to be helpful?
Yeah, it's really interesting because, as a fellow psychic medium, you'll know when you have a client in front of you and you start to open up to their energy. I do the same thing intuitively with a birth chart, and every birth chart has a different energy to me. And so I start to sit with it and I start to break it down, and I start to mix and blend my practical astrological knowledge with my intuitive knowledge. And it's really interesting too, because I'm starting to work on fusing mediumship with it as well, and starting to look at ancestral cycles in the chart and ancestral healing in the chart, and then bringing through the past loved ones that can piggyback off of that. And I think that's really interesting. But yeah, for me as a birth chart astrologer, I'm not really looking at what's upcoming, what cycles you're going through, what's predictive. Like I said, I don't fully myself resonate with being that type of practitioner. It doesn't mean that isn't valuable work. It's just not my voice in the space. And so for me, I'm more breaking down the essence of who you came here to be, your gifts, your lessons, what you came here to learn. People always ask about career and relationships and love life. I can look at that in the chart, and just start to sort of detangle why you are the way that you are, and put language to things that might have been so subconscious or that you never could put your finger on. That happens all the time. They're like, oh my gosh, thank you for saying that. I could never put my finger on that about myself, but that makes so much sense. And so it's less about this telling you who you are and more about giving you permission to fully, authentically embody yourself without judgment or shame. And especially by the time people are finding me, they're usually in their late 20s, their 30s, their 40s, their 50s. They already have gone through their first Saturn return usually. They know a lot about this, and it's a really big validation for them, especially if they're in alignment with their birth chart and they're doing exactly what the birth chart says, or say they're not and they're down this path that doesn't feel authentic to them. And then the birth chart is the permission, like, oh, I've always thought I had spiritual gifts, but I never trusted it. But here it is right here in my chart, in my career sector. Wow, I never knew I could give myself permission for that. So I think that it's really beautiful. It's just a beautiful mirror. And I always explain to my clients, like I said, no part of your chart is more important than who you choose to be. And every single part of the chart exists on a spectrum. There is a shadowy consciousness, and then there's a light-filled consciousness. And it's basically equipping you with the knowledge to make the highest choice here and now. So it's sort of like detangling your own code so that you can take that knowledge into every life circumstance, less than what's coming for you externally. I'm very internally focused in my sessions.
Can you give us an example of something that came in for a client who said, oh, I've always known that I was doing that, but I just never felt like I had the wherewithal to do it? Is there an easy example that you can share with us?
Yeah, let me think. There are so many, but sometimes, and I'm sure you know this too, when I'm in client sessions, I have 3 a day and I don't remember anything.
Why is that? I say the same thing. I remember the person, but I don't remember what we talk about. Why is that, do you think?
I think it's a form of protection. I think we can't hold everybody's energy and problems and stories and healing all day, every day. I think we also are in a sort of altered state when we're getting information. And so our conscious awareness is sort of stepped to the side so we can just flow. And so I think that's also, not the same part of the brain that's retaining everything. Sometimes there are sessions where it's like, wow, I will never forget that. But most of it, especially early on, but when you're this far in the development, I've been doing this professionally for 8 years, it's like you can't fully, remember every single thing. But I mean, I think in terms of birth chart stuff, a lot of stuff with like karmic relationships, for example, like I think another thing that as a reader I'm really good at is seeing patterns, because in my readings people always ask about love life and career, and I see the patterns and underlying things that are coming up in both. And I think there's a big energetic connection between love life and career. And so for example, in the birth chart, I see a codependent mother relationship. And then I see the same thing being played out in her house of marriage and partnerships. So I'm like, where are you recreating this codependent mother dynamic with your husband now? And I can point out things like that. That's like, oh my gosh, I could never put language to that, but I am doing that. So that's just a small example, but I can really point out patterns. Like, do you see how you not speaking your truth is leading to then, you censoring yourself at work and not putting yourself up for that promotion? It's like everything is interconnected in this way. And I think the birth chart can really show that too.
Interesting. What do you mean by listen to the whispers of your body before they turn into screams?
Yes, I'm sure as a medical intuitive, this quote spoke to you. So, especially as somebody who's highly clairsentient, I feel everything in my physical body to the nth degree. I consider myself to be a spiritual athlete. That's what my mom called me, because to be able to show up reliably every day in this space, I have to really have strong boundaries and protect myself and take care of myself. And so I really find that the body whispers to us when something is out of alignment, just like the mind and the soul does too. But the body will be like, okay, this is just a little rash right now. This is just a little upset stomach right now. This is just a little, XYZ right now. And then you take an Advil, and then you drink coffee to get more energy. And then you put an antibiotic on it, and you silence the whispers. And then finally, if you silence the whispers for long enough, it will scream to get your attention. And I'm sure you find this too, but I think the direction science is going in, and I hope it catches up to, is the mind-body connection, the emotional body connection. And as someone with PCOS and who's on a healing journey with that, I've done a lot of deep work on personal power, boundaries, and healing. And my cramps went away. It was like an emotional thing. And I think that when we are in emotional turmoil, our nervous system is dysregulated and we're in this low-grade fight or flight, and it causes inflammation in the body. And I wouldn't call myself a full-on medical intuitive, but I do have intuitive knowings about the body, and I do get things sometimes. I feel things in my physical body like it's my own. So there is a level of that. And so I think everything whispers before it screams. And I think it's like, how bad does it have to get before you finally let go and just either make a change, let something go? And that's what I say too, is that sometimes the heaviness is the message. Like sometimes people are like, give me a message. And they're like, oh, all I feel is just this heaviness. And I'm like, well, sometimes the heaviness is the message. It's time to let something go. You can't carry this load anymore.
Well, here's some validation for you. It's been my experience in scanning tens of thousands of people over the years medically for the medical stuff. And that's the majority of the work that I do, just because that's what people ask me to do. I mean, in the buffet of psychicness, we can do it all.
I think that's so cool that you do that. I really think that's so cool.
Wow, thanks. And it's really interesting to see what I get to see. But there is always 100% of the time, there is an emotional component that's in place before any kind of medical condition arises. So there's some validation for you. And I believe that's the most important part of the healing, because I watch body parts get healed all the time energetically. And then I'll go into, let's figure out what the emotional seed of all of this is. And it could be something from a past life that they've brought in to explore. It could be something that happened to them as a child. It's always an emotional event. And it may be somebody called you a bad name when you were little and it hurt your feelings. And we look at that as adults and we think, well, that was no big deal. Somebody called me a poopy face or something. Well, it was a big deal to your 3-year-old little self when it happened. And then it can be something dramatic. It doesn't matter what it was, because as soon as we illuminate, and I'm given a year, I'm shown what's happened in my mind's eye. And if they remember it, great. If they don't, it's irrelevant, because as soon as we illuminate it, it eradicates it, allows that energy field membrane, which is the container that holds the energy and of the body and the spirit. And they've got an energy leak that's preceding the manifestation of a medical condition. When we do that, that's when the healing can happen. Because we can fix body parts all day long, but if you're leaking power, what's the point? Is my feeling about that. And it's fascinating what comes in. And most of the time, I'll say, okay, the year's 1985. And they'll just know right off the bat, okay, my parents got divorced. I was in a car accident. There was a sledding accident on our toboggan when I was 7. It just comes in. And then I'll be watching the scene before they even identify it in my mind's eye. It's really fascinating what comes up. Yeah.
I work with the inner child a lot as well. And instead of years, ages come to me. They're like, oh, they're bringing up 18, like something about when you were 18 is connecting with this or that. And yeah.
Or I'll see them in a car accident and they're 3 and they're in a mid 1960s yellow Dodge, whatever, with the tail fin headlights and all of that. I'll say, you're in the back seat and there was an accident. You were thrown into the front seat. And yeah, they'll say, yeah. And I had lots of stitches in my head and I still have a scar from them. Say, okay, that's what's going on. Another quote of yours that I love is, fear is the best liar.
Mm-hmm. Fear
what
is
do you mean
the
by
best
that?
liar in the world. Well, fear is the inverse frequency of our angels and our guides. And I always call that fearful voice the inner villain voice, because if you speak it out loud in an over-the-top Dr. Evil or Disney villain voice, you realize how ridiculous it sounds. But fear is trying to protect us. That voice is trying to protect us. It's just so out of balance in this society. And it is basically an accumulation of our past trauma, our shadows, our wounds, our worries about ourselves, our insecurities. And it's trying to keep us small and safe and in fear. And that's why I always say self-doubt is actually a good sign. If you're really fearing and you're doubting yourself and you're insecure, it means that you're doing something to break out of a comfort zone. So that's a really good sign.
Back to the evidential medium thing. You said you were self-taught in a lot of this. Were you self-taught in that as well? Tell us a little bit about how that came around. And back to, I think you mentioned that you believe everybody has the ability to do this. I certainly do, and I teach it. And we're all doing it. We just don't understand or recognize that we're doing it. But everybody has the ability to develop and enhance those skills.
Yep.
Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And I think that most people are getting more information than they realize. They just don't know what they're looking for.
Yeah. And they don't trust the information they get.
Yeah.
They just think, oh, that's just my imagination. Well, yeah, imagination plays into the whole big picture here. And it's learning to validate and then trust what you get. And then that's where you go forward. But what was your journey to become an evidential medium?
So at this point, I was deep enough into my angel reading journey to be less afraid. And past loved ones started to step into my sessions. And it felt different to me. And I was getting frustrated because I knew there was more that they wanted to say, but I just wasn't understanding how to connect with them more. And so I was like all up here with the angels, like in my upper chakra, and I had to like come back down to my heart. And I just didn't understand that. Like it's almost like switching from English to French or something. Like I'm like switching languages, and I just didn't know that language, even though it was a sister language. And so I remember I had this one practice session. I was like, because my guides did tell me it's time to start to learn to develop mediumship before my mom passed. And I have these like same groups of friends that let me practice things on them. And I sat with my friend, and her grandpa came in, and he actually told me his name, and I got his personality, and he had a message for her mom about how sorry he was. And it was like the first time that I was like, whoa, I think I could actually do this. Like, I wasn't already working with angels. I just went in straight to mediumship, and I was like more in that space. And it's like a little bit, it took me a little while to figure out the dance between the two in the session. And so my husband and I are like thinking about having kids in the next year or two. And we're like doing this bucket list of like everything we want to do before we have kids. Not that your life ends when you have kids, but it's different. And one of mine was going to this school called Arthur Findlay College, because the ethics of mediumship I take very seriously, and it would horrify me to like put words in the mouth of people's past loved ones. And so that's not to say, sometimes you might misinterpret something or you have to be perfect. I have to let perfectionism go, but I just wanted to do everything in my power to be the best voice for the spirit world and representative of the spirit world. And so I ended up this time last year, going to Arthur Findlay College. And I chose this course called Mediumship Aspiring to Excellence, which was this like advanced level course with 100 mediums from all around the world. And I was just blown away by my experience there. And I remember on day one, I was the first person that got called on to demonstrate. And at the time, I didn't even know what demonstrating was, or that we would be doing that, or I probably would not have gone. And I just remember standing in front of my group and just saying, okay, spirit, like worst thing can happen. I fall on my face, but I'm just going to trust fall into you at this point, and let's see what happens. And my teacher like sent me a little bit of her power, a little bit of her energy, and she had her hand behind my lower back. And it was as if this lightning bolt went through my body. And all of a sudden I had this woman here who passed at 58, and her name was Linda, and she was a hairdresser, and she had problems with men. And I just knew blah, 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 like rapid fire. And then I had two other people coming in named Mary and Sue. And those were the other two people that had just passed in this woman's life. And like everything was so heightened. And it's almost like, driving a Ferrari. So you know what's possible. And then you're like back in a whatever car and having to like develop to get to that level. It's like sometimes the spirit world takes you to such an incredible first experience so that you know what you're capable of. And then it's like developing to get back to that. So for the past year, I've just been completely like, I caught the mediumship bug, and I'm in a circle, and I'm developing, and I work with mentors. And as of late March this year, I started offering it professionally, and I sit with people every week, and it's just been incredibly rewarding.
I've heard people, and I know several people that have been to that school, the Arthur Findlay School, and I've heard people say it's like a modern day Hogwarts. And did you feel spirit when you were there? I mean, was it like a Hogwarts kind of a thing where you could feel them walking down the hall and there were spirits in the audience and stuff like that?
Oh yeah, it was incredible. It was incredible. It's funny because I have a 4-part series about my experience there on my podcast, and I do call it My Time at the Modern Day Hogwarts is like the title. But yeah, I mean, and also just being in the presence of 100 mediums from around the world was incredible, because I find that when I sit with other mediums, it's like, whoa, okay, like a little jolt of energy there, like, And so, yeah, it was my first time ever, because I've been on a very solitary path with this. Like, I'm the only one in my friend group that does this, and I don't know very many people in the spiritual space. And of course, that has changed now that I'm a little bit more out there and have my podcast and things like that. But it was like very cathartic for me to be with a group of people that understood. And I remember my very first day, I mean, I was in tears the entire time. Like, I was crying every single day. And the very first day, I made friends with this guy named Mark, and we were in line for food at the dinner line. I just sobbed to him. The very first day conversation with him, I was like, I've never been in a situation where I felt more understood or around people that all believe the same thing as me. And it was just this like weight off of my heart. It was amazing.
Yeah. I find too that when information is coming in from spirit, I tend to talk faster. And it's like it's coming in boom, 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 rapid fire. And sometimes, especially if I'm talking to somebody whose main language isn't English, I'll say, if you need me to clarify something or you need me to slow down, let me know. And it's interesting. It's just because the information's just coming so fast, 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 fast. I have a fun story. I don't know that I've ever shared this on the air before. I was with a friend who was the president of a community college. And he was showing me around the tour of his campus. It was in another state. And they had this beautiful performing arts center. And so we were on the stage and we were looking out into the audience. And the college is on an old military base in Nevada, in New Mexico. And like ancient military base. And so there are some buildings still left, and there are different foundations that you can see. There had been a forest fire that had burned most of it. And Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders even trained there. And then through World War II and on and on. So we were walking around the campus and I was saying, okay, this building was this. I could see it. I could see the cargo trucks driving through and stuff like that from different areas. So we're on the stage and his dean of the business school was with us and we sat down in these chairs and we were having a conversation. Well, before long, the auditorium, which held 1,200 people, filled with spirits. And so the three of us were sitting on the stage and the spirits were asking us questions, and they were all from these different eras. And there were nurses there and there were soldiers there in different uniform dress and stuff like that. And at the end, we needed to go do whatever it was we were going to go do. We got a standing ovation from these spirits. It was wild. And so he and his dean of the business school he said, we still talk about that. And we were in her office and a officer walked in her office because they were seeing spirits in there all the time. And he walked in the office and we got the guy's name and his rank and when he was there. And so my friend Greg looked it up on his phone. He was able to access the overall records of all that. And they found this colonel who was there and all that. So prepare yourself because you may have a situation like that arise if you were feeling that and seeing that at the school. You just never know where you're going to be, where you may have a situation arise where it was like that. It was wild, and it was validating because a lot of the questions they were asking and things they were saying, my friend Greg and I don't remember his dean's name, they were able to corroborate a lot of it with historic documentation that they had there at their school. It was just amazing. That's the closest thing that I've had to a Hogwarts where there were just tons of spirits in one area that I could communicate with all of them, as we went on. All right, last question. Why do we incarnate?
To put it the most simply as I can, I think our purpose of incarnation is to fully, authentically, and powerfully explore this slice of consciousness. So I think we kind of come into different characters, different stories, different paths, and our job is to just fully, wholly, authentically, and powerfully embody that. And when we do that, I really believe we are living our purpose.
Beautifully said. Wow, you are such an impressive young gal. My goodness, girl. You're brilliant. You're eloquent. She's gorgeous for those of you that are listening and not watching.
Aww.
I mean, go look on the YouTube channel. But what a delight to get to meet you and spend this time chatting with you. How can people learn more about you and your work?
Julie, thank you so much. That was so kind. And this has been such a beautiful conversation today. You can find me on Instagram at Angels and Amethyst with underscores in between. I'm the only verified account. I will never DM you for a reading. I'm sure a lot of your guests have to have that specification. I'm on angelsandamethyst.com is my website and is spelled out. I do offer some go at your own pace workshops. I have a Be Your Own Angelic Intuitive workshop. I have a Healing the Witch Wound workshop. I have Working with Angels to Attract a Soulmate Connection workshop. So I have a lot of beautiful workshops there. And then I also have my own podcast called Magic Hour with Taylor Paige that's on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube.
Okay, terrific. Alrighty, everybody, that's it for today. Sending you lots of love from Sweet Home, Alabama. Mwah! And from Los Angeles, too, where Taylor is. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
To enhance your spiritual journey, click on one of the videos below and remember to subscribe, leave a comment, and share with your family and friends.